Hello, everyone, and welcome to GTM's Ask the HR Expert panel discussion. My name is Merrill. I'm with GTM. I'll be your moderator today. I didn't expect much debate out of all of you, but actually I'm here to ask the questions and to get the most information from all of you out of our experts panel here. We'll introduce them in just a moment. First, a word about GTM, if I may. A quick word. We provide industry-leading HCM technology, best-in-class HR services, and dedicated local support to help companies increase efficiencies and productivity while accelerating key business decisions and boosting employee performance and engagement. GTM's HCM platform integrates payroll, time, benefits, and HR data into a large, single, secure, cloud-based system, lowering costs and streaming workflow processes. For companies needing outsourced HR assistance, GTM's HR consultants help you handle the ever-changing legal compliances out there, manage and retain talent, and implement HR best practices that keep employees aligned and engaged with your business goals. We welcome all of you here today. Those of you who are joining us online, there's dozens of you out there. If you have not yet had a chance to pose a question for our panelists, you can look right on your Zoom control console panel there. There's a chat functionality. You can ask your questions there. And anyone here in our training center in Clifton Park is welcome to raise their hand and ask a question as well. By the way, you'll all be receiving later today a link with a recording of today's presentation. We'll get to as many questions as we can, and more importantly, get to the answers you need from our HR panel of experts. And why don't I introduce them right now? It gives me great pleasure and pride to introduce our panel from GTM. First off, Patricia Stockman, who's a certified senior human resources professional with more than 20 years of expertise in HR. She specializes her specialties include creating job descriptions and employee handbooks, resolving employee conflicts, policy creation, needs and skills assessments, and training. She also provides a succession planning and benefits administration and offers employers keys to motivating a staff with positive and proactive leadership style. Next up, we have Jennifer Berry. She also brings more than 20 years of experience to the GTM HR consulting team. She has experience with mergers and acquisitions, HR project management, HR and benefits compliance, and more. Jennifer has led HR process audits, ERISA audits, employee handbook projects, benefits administration platform development, and she's developed and delivered trainings on both HR and benefits compliance. And lastly, but not least, is Deana Prest, who has more than 35 years of extensive senior level HR experience in both union and non-union settings. As an HR consultant, she has focused on workplace investigations, including discrimination, harassment, safety, Title IX investigations, as well as project-based services, including employee handbooks, process assessments, and coaching and supervisory training. Thank you to our experts for being here today, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Many of the questions were presented to us in advance by those in attendance today, online and in person. So let's start with you, Patricia. First off, the current requirement for paid COVID sick days in New York. Are there updates to this?
Actually, they have not changed much since 2020. To be eligible for coverage under New York State sick leave for COVID, employees must be under a mandatory or precautionary order of quarantine or isolation. However, New York State is encouraging employers today to create policies that will assist employees to stay home whenever they're sick and accept positive results of self-tests rather than waiting for medical. So public employers must provide 14 days of job protection and paid sick leave. The Number of days that private employers have to comply with varies. Small employers have to offer 5 days. Small employers are 1 to 10 employees with a net income of $1 million or less. Mid-size employers, those with 11 to 99 employees, are required to provide at least 5 days of paid sick leave. And then large employers, those with 100 or more employees, must provide at least 14 days of protected paid COVID sick leave. Tracking sick leave for COVID should really be done separately because you may have a sick leave policy that allows employees time off for other things than COVID. But with COVID, you want to track that separately up to 5 days, and each employee is eligible for up to 3 times. They could use that sick leave 3 times within their current lifetime. Some have already exhausted that because of the 3 years that we've been dealing with COVID.
So it seems like there are a lot of answers to that little question, and that's why you three are so busy.
It keeps us busy,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to get answers to these questions, and some of them are available just by Googling fall 2022 to winter 2023 COVID-19 guidelines.
Awesome, that's a great resource, thank you. Jen, we have a question for you. What is the importance associated with employee classification or the risks an employer has associated with misclassification of a worker? We're talking about exempt versus, non-exempt, independent contractors versus W-2 employees. And also, what are the rules that are in place in New York State for manual labor? Are there different rules for different situations?
No, I think employee classification is probably one of the biggest issues an employer has to deal with, and most people hire and say you are what you are and base it on the job description, but really you have to get it right from the top because there are legal risks, there are audit risks, and there's a lot of money involved with that. So first and foremost, you need to determine if your employees are exempt or not exempt. To be truthful, most jobs are considered non-exempt and are paid hourly. You're based on the hours you work, you're eligible for overtime if you work over 40 hours, etc. Exempt employees are a little different, and they're paid by a salary at a specific dollar amount, and there are federal and state limits to that dollar amount. And they also have to perform a certain function or job that is considered exempt under both federal and state law. So getting those classifications right off the bat is a considerable help, because if you were ever audited and misclassified someone as exempt, and as a result they did not earn overtime for hours worked, you are now suddenly liable for a lot of back overtime and interest and penalties. So that's the first classification that's important. Now you want to make sure that you're hiring someone as an employee if they actually are your employee. If they are under your control as far as what they're doing in their job. It's called behavioral control. This is one of the tests that the courts have come out with to determine the difference between employees and independent contractors. Then they are likely an employee. And that behavioral control is you're deciding where they work, what they work on, how they're working on it, providing the tools for that job, etc. Also, if they're under your financial control, meaning that you're deciding what they're earning for what they're doing, you're paying them benefits for what they're doing, and you're otherwise not treating them all that differently than your other employees, then they're most likely employees. Independent contracts are very specific in that they typically have their own expertise, and that's why you've hired them. They bring their own tools and abilities to the job, and they don't usually follow your regular employee instructions and policies. They typically come in, do the job, and leave. So that is also an important classification. And finally, you talked about manual workers. New York has specific pay requirements for different types of workers. Most people can be paid semi-monthly, bi-weekly, which I think is probably more the norm, and most employers choose to pay everyone on that same cycle so that they don't have to have multiple cycles. Manual workers is a specific category that requires payment weekly, and a lot of people misclassify these people and don't pay them. So if they were ever audited, that's also a financial risk, also risk and penalty for your business. So make sure if you have employees who are doing manual labor, at least 25% of their job, this would be maintenance professionals, etc., that you're classifying them correctly and paying them correctly.
Thank you very much. Next up, Deana. how are I-9 verifications to be handled now that we're in a post-pandemic era?
Well, this is a timely question. The Department of Homeland Security just sent out an update on May 5th, indicating that the flexibilities that we've all enjoyed about being able to verify documentation remotely, not in person, those that flexibility went into place March of 2020, and it's still in place now. But they just announced earlier this month that as of July 31st, that flexibility is going away. And after that, you'll need to go back to your normal practice of verifying documentation for I-9s in person, source documents. And all of those I-9s that you verified during the pandemic remotely, people emailed their documents in, you'll have to re-verify those in person by August 31st.
Of this year?
Yes.
All right. We've got some work to do.
Yeah.
Patty, what are the critical components for successful recruitment in today's challenging job market?
There are many factors that go into successful recruitment. It starts with a recruitment strategy, and that needs to be agile. The labor market's constantly changing, and only those that can adapt quickly can really thrive in it. Agility allows recruitment teams to stay competitive and navigate the evolving job market. Job markets change all the time. Very recently, we've had an employer's job market where there were a lot of employees looking for work and very few jobs out there. And then suddenly it'll change and all the jobs start opening up, and then there are less and less employees looking for work. So knowing what job market or what labor market you're in is really very important. Creating a recruitment strategy is one of the critical elements, and that will be based on the labor market and the job market at the time. But that's going to be determining where, when, and how a job opening is posted or advertised, how much information about the company that you want to provide to encourage applicants. So, you're going to want to include the company's culture, the company's vision, what your intentions are for that position. Is there growth opportunities? And that all is encompassing what the salary ranges are, what your benefits are, anything and everything that a company offers to the employee. Another thing that you're going to want to consider in your recruitment strategy is passive recruitment. Is that going to be needed? There are not a lot of people out there in the job market. Then you may have to reach out to those people who are currently working, don't even know that they're interested in looking for another job. So you just kind of reach out to them and send that job opportunity out there and make it obvious to them that they should consider it. Quick responses is another critical component, because people that are looking are going to want to make a decision. They're not going to want to wait for you to make a decision whether or not you're going to hire them. So keeping the process moving and keeping it expedited is really important. I've lost a couple of really good candidates just because the client was taking their time, and somebody went on vacation, somebody else wasn't available. So by the time we got back to the candidate to say, yes, we're really interested, they were like, well, I just accepted another job. So, being expeditious with your decisions is really important. And let's see, what else did I miss? The number of processes, the number of steps that you take during an interview is important too, because sometimes you have a very high level position, you may need that person to do different assessments and then also provide letters of recommendation. And so there's a lot of different things that go into recruiting. One of the critical components for making up the recruitment strategy is a job description. An excellent job description can help the interviewee or the interviewer develop the right questions and know what to look for in the interviewee.
Well, it sounds like from your job description earlier, when we were going through your resume, those are things that you can offer as a consultant and really take the guesswork out for the employer that's looking to, certainly if they're looking to hire somebody, that's a critical component of what their organization is going to need, and you can help them with that.
Absolutely.
Terrific. Jen, what deductions are permitted from an employee's paycheck and which ones are prohibited?
Right, just like classifying employees correctly, setting people up in your payroll system, whether that's a manual system or electronic system, is critical. New York State is very protective of employees. This is not the first time you're going to hear of this today. So they very much limit what you can deduct from an employee's paycheck to 4 things. The first is anything that's allowable by law, so federal or state law, and those are typically the state and federal taxes that are being taken out, or Social Security, those things that we see, all of us see on our paychecks. The other thing is something that's authorized by the employee in advance, in writing, and also for their benefit. And all of those words are very critical. It has to have all of those various components. So those are things like your deductions for benefits. So you signed up for health insurance, or you may have a gym membership through your office, or you may have daycare fees that you pay, whether it's in through your office or to pay for daycare for your children. You can also deduct tuition. There's a few other categories of things, but it also has to be authorized. Things change. New York is very stubborn on deducting anything else. The only other 2 categories happen much more rarely, and they are if there's a clerical error in someone's paycheck made by the employer is authorized to deduct that money to replace any corrections that need to be made due to that clerical error. If it's a large amount of money, they do need to work with the employee to make sure that they are doing it at a pace and regularity that meets their financial obligations as to not unfairly and unduly harm them. And the final category is if the employer has advanced money to an employee. I find that fewer employers are doing this, but some do. They are allowed to put together a payment plan that can be deducted from someone's paycheck. And that, again, should be set up in advance with the employee at a rate that is suitable for both parties and is done fairly.
So you have this separate agreement, but it all has to really be labeled on the check stub, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Documentation is always key in all of these things, and New York State being so protective, I would recommend putting everything in writing and having it signed.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Deana, and this happens sometimes, an employee goes to their employer and requests a workplace accommodation. How should that be handled by the employer?
One of the things that, if you have an HR office within your, within the employer, they're going to know how to handle it. But the problem comes when an employee approaches a supervisor who may not always necessarily know that an accommodation is being requested. They may not use that language. If it's an older employee who is unable to perform all of the functions within their job description any longer, if it's a physical job, those accommodations may seep into the work arrangement. And I've seen that happen before, and no one realizes that accommodations are being provided. So it's important that supervisors are trained on how to recognize when an employee is requesting an accommodation. When that does happen, involve your HR department, who will be more experienced. And one of the other really important things besides training is documentation. It should be a request from the employee that's put in writing and be supported by medical documentation. It shouldn't just be the employee saying, I need this accommodation because I can no longer do this physical work. It needs to be supported by a doctor's note. And then the third critical piece to this is that once it's been identified as an accommodation, it's been certified by a doctor, the employer and the employee need to engage in an interactive process to negotiate what actually can be accommodated and maybe what can't be accommodated if the person is no longer able to do the essential functions of the job. Getting back to that job description being so important, then another position or something else may have to be done and if an accommodation can't be granted.
So as an HR consultant, you can kind of help facilitate that negotiate it out, and so that both parties come to an agreement that works, and it's something that works for the organization as well, not just for the employees.
Sure, we've negotiated those and navigated those conversations in the past, and again, training, documentation, and that interactive process are key to successfully navigating an accommodation request.
This panel is so experienced. It's great to be here with you, working with you. I was just handed a question, an online question came my way. Can our handbook say vacation time is not paid out upon termination for all employees? And then Patty, oh, all right, then Jen.
No, I mean, yes, you can absolutely create your own policy as it relates to paying out vacation or other paid time off. In fact, that should be the way it's done, because of New York State, if it's not clearly written, may find one way if an employee tries to get some assistance after their termination and didn't get money. They may actually have a cause of action towards the employer. So everything, you know, we're all talking about documenting. That is a very important part of both your paid time off policy as well as your termination policy. And it should be written in your handbook.
Thank you. Patricia, so I've heard some talk about this. I don't know the specific dates or the information, but what are the new New York State salary posting requirements when an employer advertises to fill a job opening?
This one is sparking a lot of controversy with employers. New York State has joined the trend of requiring employers to post salary ranges in job postings. In December, the governor signed New York Pay Transparency Law, which requires employees to list salary ranges for all advertised jobs, promotions, and transfers, whether it's internally within the company or out on the any job board. Employers with 4 or more employees must post salary ranges in job ads effective September 18th of this year. The purpose for this legislation was to eliminate some pay disparities and discrimination through increased pay transparency. According to figures available from state officials, women in the Empire State earned 86 cents for every dollar that men earned in 2019. That's really very recent, considering the improvements that we've made over the years. So providing pay information is increasingly considered best practice in the business community. The state law also requires that job description be included in job postings. So, you know, if you're going to put a job posting out there, you can't just say what the title is and the amount of pay that you're going to be offering. You have to also describe the job itself.
And when they talk about pay range, are there guidelines for that? I mean, so from 30,000 to 130,000, or does it really have to be tighter than that? How does that work?
Right now, there are no ranges. And employers are doing that. I actually have clients that are setting it at 70,000 to 120,000, just because they don't want to be specific. It's really hurting the employers where their employees are making a certain amount currently, but in order to get somebody new with more experience, they have to raise that a bit, and everybody is going to start looking at compensation closely.
Thank you. All right, we have another question that's come in online. Does it matter if we misclassify exempt versus non-exempt if we're a private school and never work over 35 hours?
I actually have worked in that industry, and there is actually a professional exemption in New York that allows people teaching faculty in that category to be considered exempt without meeting the salary requirement. So there's already an exception in New York State to that. So they can be paid at whatever range they want as long as they're meeting the duties, which typically someone who is a trained faculty member or has gone to school for teaching and has certification would qualify for that.
I just enjoy listening to what you all have to say. There's so much to know out there, and it's great that you're a resource available to employers out there. Deana, you're an employer facing a Department of Labor audit. What do you do?
Don't panic. There are lots of reasons for a DOL audit. They can happen at any time, but typically they are triggered by an employee complaint to the DOL. So if you do receive notice, you should be given time to prepare and gather the information that the DOL is requesting. Once you've been assigned an auditor, I would really encourage you to reach out to that person and understand what it is that they're requesting. Even if it's listed in the documentation that you received, pick up the phone or send an email and ask for clarification. Just like any other legal proceeding, you don't want to provide information that's not being requested, and you don't want to answer questions that are not being asked of you. So reach out to that auditor and make sure that you're on the same page, and that rapport will serve you well going through the process. They're just doing a job, and they're there to help you work through the process, so that person's expertise can help you as well.
And they don't typically come pounded on the door. You get notice that they're coming. So can an employer like scramble and, oh gee, I gotta get my job descriptions updated before the audit happens? Is there time for an employer to do that between being notified and when the audit actually happens? Are they allowed to do that?
Yes, you're given a certain amount of time, and you can request an extension as well. It's all another interactive process that if you engage in, it will serve you well.
Thank you. Patty, an employee is leaving an employer. Should there be an exit interview? Is that a given? It always should happen? What's your opinion?
Yes, I always encourage my clients to do exit interviews. They're critical to employee retention. They will provide an employer with important information about the employee's stay while they were at the company, any stumbling blocks that they may have tripped over during the time that they were there, any way that they were not encouraged or provided training that they may have needed. So, answers to the right questions can assist in recruiting new employees by giving the interviewer insight into what they should be looking for in that new employee. I didn't have the qualifications for the job that I was doing, but I never told my manager that because obviously I didn't want to get fired. I just looked for another job. So it would be better to know that that was one of the things that was missing when you go to hire that person's replacement. I found that exit interviews are most informative when they're conducted in person on the employee's last day, because this way they are more comfortable in being honest and open. They're obviously not going to want to tell anyone in the company that, their manager made their life difficult while they were there, or that their coworkers were badgering them. They may not be comfortable doing that while they're part of the organization, but on their last day, when they're walking out the door, they have nothing to worry about. They're not going to be confronted by anyone for saying those things. And those are the types of things that you can correct as an employer, so that the next person that comes in doesn't fall into that same trap, and that can help to reduce your turnover.
Is there anything an employer can do to strongly encourage or force an employee to go through that exit interview process in terms of, I'm going to hold back this or that unless you do the interview with me? Is that anything that can be done?
No, unfortunately, we really don't have any control over that. If the employee decides they don't want to speak to you, they're not going to. But hopefully your HR department has a good rapport with the employees and can get that information from them.
Absolutely. I'm sure it's valuable. Jen, what are the keys to compliant leave management and the best advice for managing the alphabet soup of leaves such as FMLA, DVL, PFL, WC, ETC, oh, that's et cetera.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so I find leave management to be one of the most frustrating and difficult parts of being an HR professional. I think even with all the expertise in the world. So that's one of the main areas that I always recommend to my clients that they outsource and or automate. There's just, as you just read all of the letters that are considered part of that alphabet soup, there's a lot of types of leave, and those are just the leaves that are in New York State. There, if you are a multi-state organization and deal with any other state, you're dealing with double that amount of letters. So the first difficult part of leave management is even often determining if your employee is eligible for certain types of leave management. And sometimes it's their time employed at the organization, and sometimes it's related to, you know, the reason for them needing to be out under one of those various categories. So there's FMLA, which is a federal leave that's job protected and it doesn't provide any pay. That runs concurrently with a lot of the other various leaves. So that means you're having to track 2, 3, 4 different types of leaves together. So having a good tracking system as well helps you keep track of the various types of leave, the various lengths of leave, the various types of pay, or whether leaves are unpaid. They can get very confused and very jumbled. And those were typically done previously in a spreadsheet, which, you know, you get up pages of spreadsheets and your eyes will roll. So that's what we call it, drowning in your alphabet soup. I highly recommend to everyone out there that they reach out, and we have an excellent leave management group here, but make sure that you're consulting with someone who has an expertise in that area, and you're learning about what qualifies people for certain types of leave and managing them effectively.
And New York State paid sick leave has a carryover as well, right? Does that make it even more confusing?
Right, and paid sick leave is on top of the various other types of leave. So people typically go out for their own disability, illness, or sickness. They'll go out to take care of a family member. They'll go out for birth of a child. They'll go out, they need some mental health time. There's various reasons for people to be on leave. There's military leave. So there's many reasons that people will need to be out, and those also interact with, that's a good point, Raleigh, your internal time off policies as well. So it can become a big mess if you're not used to sifting through all the various pieces.
Thank you. We have another question from our online attendees today. Employees sometimes ask us for other employees' addresses to send bereavement cards, etc. Should we be doing that?
No.
See your head shaking.
No. What you want to do is have the people give the cards to the HR person or another manager in the company, and then that manager can then distribute it. We never want to provide any personal information that's against the HIPAA laws.
Thank you. Deana, what's the minimum pay requirement for exempt employees in New York State? We talked about this a little bit earlier, but specifically, what are the cutoffs where somebody would qualify or not qualify?
Sure. So the question just said New York. I don't know if they were meaning New York State, New York City. So I pulled both. New York City and the surrounding areas, the annual salary limit is $58,500, which equates to $1,125 weekly. So anything below that would be exempt. And the rest of the state is $55,341 annually, or $1,064.25 weekly.
Jen, what's the status of the HERO Act in New York State?
So like a lot of COVID related things, they sort of are in a standstill right now because we're not sure if we're in it or out of it yet. But the New York HERO Act was enacted in 2021, in May of 2021. And I think that it was in response to people starting to go back to work from being home for COVID related reasons. And it really was to protect people's safety while they were in their work environment. It required employers to put together an infectious disease prevention plan. The Department of Labor created model plans. Our team here at GTM created model plans, and these were meant to be activated when New York State Department of Health said that we had an action communicable disease going on, infectious disease was effective in the state. Since March of 2022, we have not had that status. It ended in, I believe it was March 7th in 2022. So those plans do not need to be active, if you will. But as a group and just as an HR professional, I always find it helpful to have a prevention plan for keeping your employees safe, active at all times. So the things that were included were things about sanitizing the office and what people should do, wear a mask or not wear a mask, or how long they should stay home if they were sick or not sick, those types of things. A lot of those would only apply during an active COVID or other infectious disease outbreak. But I don't think the lessons that are included in there should be stopped altogether. So I always advise people to keep that plan in their employee handbook or otherwise available to employees and to continue following what's included in those plans. Another part of the plan did have some stay-at-home guidance as it relates to when people test positive. We, since September of 2022 in New York State, have followed the CDC guidelines versus having our own. So those guidelines are out there for everyone to see, and those were typically included as part of that plan.
Good, thank you. Question for Deana. She's ready for one, I could tell. An employer is hiring a new employee in New York State for the first time. What should be considered?
So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Doing business in New York State has its own requirements in terms of licensing and certifications. And then there are the tax implications as well. If that person is working in New York State, the employer needs to establish a tax account within the state, establish an unemployment account, workers' comp, the list goes on. So hopefully they have a payroll provider that can help them navigate that, because every state is different and the requirements are different in each state as well.
Thank you. So Patricia, we talked about, well, I'm not sure if this, I guess this is related to the hiring process of what is behavioral interviewing and why is it effective? Is that what we're talking about in the interview process of a potential new employee?
It is. It's part of the recruitment and interviewing process. Behavioral interviewing is become very popular. It provides a wealth of information about an applicant's professional history, skills, experience, but also the culture and the style that that person works best in. One company to the next has different cultures and different employment styles. So getting down to how that employee or prospective employee would function within your company is really important. And behavioral interviewing can assist in that. The questions that we ask in behavioral interviewing are about how the candidate has functioned in different scenarios. So, you know, specific situations that they've been accustomed to handling in prior jobs. The interviewer asked them, ask the applicants to tell about an experience where they had to use certain skills or how they handled or would handle certain situations in typical jobs. Their answers give more realistic sense of how the person works based on actual performance and can provide better understanding of how a person thinks, acts, and fits into your team. Some typical questions are, you know, describe a time when you disagreed with a coworker or a boss, manager. How did you handle that situation? Give me an example of when you had to assume a leadership role and, you know, how did you handle that? So one of the most challenging situations is, you know, having to deal with difficult people in the job. How do you handle those situations? And that can give you a lot of insight as to how they would handle behavioral situations within your own organization.
Thank you. Jen, what circumstances are appropriate for non-disclosure agreements?
So I did mention previously a number of times how protective New York is of employees. So non-disclosure agreements are typically included as part of the paperwork that employees are used to signing when they start a new job. It protects the employer from the employee going in and divulging any confidential information as it relates to the business, trade secrets, if you happen to be in a technology business, IP information that could be considered trade secrets. But it's a way to keep confidential information undisclosable, if you will. New York, however, thinks that that type of agreement somewhat prevents employees from seeking outside business opportunities or outside employment if they were to leave. They're certainly protective of some of those confidential items included in those types of agreements, but they have become very restrictive as it relates to the use of them. So they require a few things. They want employers to be very clear in the document. Whether it's a two-way or a one-way confidential agreement. Is the employer also obligated to keep your confidential information that way? I think most people would agree that a bilateral agreement would be most effective in that area. They also have to be very clear about what is considered confidential information. This is usually the majority of the document. New York needs things to be specified. They don't want to say all information that you learned while you were employed here cannot be divulged to the public. So specific information about what is considered in defining confidential information is very important. The timeline that the contract will be effective is also very, very important. Will it only be during your employment? Is there a time period after your employment where you're considered under the obligation of this agreement? And finally, just making sure that they are done and written with the correct terminology. Those types of agreements should always be done with the consultation of, I would say, with your own counsel. But New York is very restrictive. Case law is showing that they are not upholding those as much as they used to before, even when people have real legitimate confidential information that they don't want out there. And one side note is if something's already public information, you can find it on the internet or you can find it some other way. It can't be included as part of that. And that's one of the main reasons a lot of NDAs are being struck down by the courts.
Interesting. Thank you. Onboarding, let's talk about that, Deana. I often say some of the smartest people I know look the dumbest when they're sitting in front of a government form, a tax form, a filing form, what's their filing status going to be. But there are some new ways, new technology, ways to automate, streamline onboarding for employees coming into an organization, whether it's a one-off or somebody hiring a whole staff. There's a lot of information flowing there. What are some of the ways that automation can help in that world of onboarding?
Automating the onboarding and orientation process, and we'll talk about how those differ. But automating those can be a great tool both to engage with the employee prior to them getting on site, and it's a great way to keep track and keep the information all in one place. So orientation has to do with bringing the employee into your benefit system, getting them in payroll. I think that's more of an event. The onboarding process is just that. It's a process that can take up to a full year for an employee to be fully integrated into the company culture, cross-trained, understanding what other departments do within the organization, giving them a real 360 orientation to the company, its culture, and how they fit into that bigger picture of the organization. If an employee is maybe had a bad experience with an orientation or onboarding in the past, they may ask that during the interview process. What will my onboarding look like? And that's a great question. And it's very telling if the employer can tell them over the next 12 months, we are going to really embrace you into this organization and teach you not just about your own role and how you're going to contribute to the larger organization, but how you impact other departments, other employees, and really, as I said, give them a 360 view. So it should be very comprehensive. it's not an event, it's a process, and really speaks to retention as well.
Thank you. Here's a jump ball question from our online attendee. Is there a deadline for the healthcare worker bonus program?
So there are different vesting periods. I believe there were 5 vesting periods that were included as part of that bonus program. We've already passed 2 of them. So I believe there's 3 remaining. They are 6-month vesting periods whereby people who could be eligible for that healthcare workers bonus program would have had to been employed by an employer for the full vesting period, meaning the full 6-month period. And just in case people aren't aware of what the healthcare worker bonus program is, it's something that New York State decided to start last fall, basically to help retain and to provide some incentive for those healthcare workers who did work so hard during the pandemic, to keep them motivated and continuing on in the same mission and the work that they were doing during that time frame. So people who are eligible can earn up to $1,500 per vesting period, and they're eligible for pay in 2 vesting periods max, so they can earn a total of $3,000. It's always nice to send the email to people. I've done so myself, saying that you are getting a $1,500 check and thank you for your service. So that's one of the great benefits that New York State has given us coming out of COVID as HR people.
Well, this has been quite a session. I thank you all for your participation online and in person here. But thank you to the panel for all the information you provided us. I mean, so really, the time went fast. It's time for us to wrap things up. And that's all the time we have. We want to thank Patricia, Jennifer, and Deana as well for sharing extensive HR knowledge. And I think anyone who's joined us has gotten a lot out of this, and you've got some takeaways for sure. If you're interested in learning more about GTM HR consulting services and how we can help develop HR strategies that align with your business goals, you can visit our website at gtm.com/business. You can find our contact information there. Also, contact information is coming your way in the email you'll receive later today, which is coming your way. We'll have the recording of this session as well. So if you heard something and you want to hear it again, you can go ahead and do that, or share the information with a friend if you like. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Thank you.